Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. I'm really delighted about today's guest, where we're going to talk all about leadership. I'm happy to welcome John Hillen. He's an author, he's a CEO, and he's a leadership strategist. So the audience and listeners and viewers that are interested in strategic leadership, real world applications, foundational frameworks, and strategic thinking, John's the man today, and I'm really happy to have him on. John, welcome.
Great. Good to be with you, Chris.
Yeah. And briefly introduce yourself and chronicle to what you're doing now.
Sure. I'm on my fourth career as an academic right now. I teach at Duke University, and I also teach in the MBA program at George Mason University. And prior to that, I had a business career. I was the CEO of three different mid-sized technology services companies, both public and private. I did an IPO in the middle of the recession in 2009 with one of them, and that actually worked. And prior to that, I was a policy expert and a diplomat, and I started my career as a soldier.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, quite accomplished. And so you probably, based on this, you have a lot of experience. So one thing is this podcast is a business entrepreneurship podcast, and it showcases thought leaders, thinkers, showcases businesses, brands. When clients come to you, what are they coming to you to solve the problem, or what are they trying to achieve, or what are they fed up with? What is your client avatar?
Yeah, it's almost always about trying to figure out their strategy. So I teach strategy, I teach you business strategy, I teach it in other dimensions. I'm a trained strategist. And my new book is called The Strategy Dialogues. And I try to really pull this out of the clouds and put it into people's hands, because I most often get this call in September. People say, we're going to have our annual strategy offsite. I need you to come facilitate it. And this is everything from, I just did one for the fifth biggest bank in the US, right on down through small entrepreneurial firms, even nonprofits, even government agencies that call me. And I say, why September? And they say, this is when we always do our strategy. I say, wow, that's amazing, because you've tamed the entire outside world and all its complexities and all its dynamics and all the changes that swirl around you, so that they all only need to be talked about for 2 days in September. That's fantastic. You like can control the weather. And they laugh and they say, okay, what's your point? I say, my point is, you're probably not really doing your strategy. You're probably just doing your annual budget drill for next year, and you're calling it your strategy. And then we start to get into an interesting conversation about what is a strategy versus what is a budget drill or some modest strategic planning that makes you 2% better than last year. And that's when we start to have a real conversation about what is the nature of strategy and how do you have one.
Interesting. And talk about I know the business economic climate is completely up for grabs since COVID. What are some of the challenges that businesses have with developing a strategy? Talk about that first.
Yeah, you put your finger on it, Chris. There's a lot of reasons people want to avoid having a strategy. And a strategy is a longer term game plan to move your organization from where it is now to a more advantageous position in the future. So it's not a goal, although goals are part of it. It's not a mission, although your mission definitely informs your strategy. It's a complete blueprint with a series of moves that all interconnect and contribute to each other that move the organization forward. And it usually involves every part of the organization, the people, the processes, the suppliers, the buyers, right? It all has to happen at the same time. It's pretty comprehensive, and it's oriented towards the future. And if the future is uncertain, as you just pointed out, or the future looks a little scary, or nobody can predict it, and we're always bad at predicting the future, then that may cause people to just say, you know what, this is an impossible assignment. I shouldn't even think about it because it'll change tomorrow. And it's a common resistance I get to doing strategic thinking. But what I tell those people is I say, then make the opposite case to me, which is that even if the future is highly contingent, even if it's hard to predict, even if it's changing rapidly, make the case to me that you want to ignore it and let it just happen to you like the weather. Instead of knowing, maybe if you only even know a couple of months in advance, what's happening with technology trends, what's happening with consumer behavior, what's happening with funding, sources of funding, the capital markets. And very few people can successfully make that argument. They want to ignore the future. The future is going to happen whether you want it to or not. Better that you can have an organized way to face it and frame your plan going forward into it.
Interesting. A follow-up question I have for you is a lot of, for example, the previous guest was a marketer, and she was saying marketing and sales go hand in hand. Talk about strategy and execution, how those two work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think of marketing as a kind of cousin of strategy because they both fundamentally are seeking the same thing, which is to be in a distinctive position in the market, right? No marketer wants to say, my thing is the same as everybody else's. You'll never hear them say that. They fight for differentiation. So too with strategy. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about giving an enterprise, a company, whatever it is, enough differentiation, distinctiveness, but that has to be at a point of competitive advantage. So for instance, there's no use for Apple to try to seek distinctiveness for having the lowest priced phones. That would completely undermine their actual strategy, which is based on building these amazing high-end phones. So that it's not just being different for its own sake. It's being different so you can move to a point of greater advantage. And then you got to get it done. And that's the execution piece. I have a whole chapter in the book on the common foibles of execution and where if you launch a new strategy balloon, where does the air leak out? And it turns out there's been studies of hundreds of strategies that when implemented delivered less than they promised. And when you look at all those studies, you see very common, very predictable human reasons why a lot of strategies don't deliver their full bang for the buck. So I lay all this out in a kind of a fun dialogue-driven way in the book, which is, what I think Patrick Lencioni blurbed it. He thought it was fun to read, not just really practical guide to business strategy and strategic management. But putting those pieces together is sometimes difficult for people, the thinking piece and then the executing piece.
Yeah. And for the audience, John's book is The Strategy Dialogues, which we'll get into more depth later in the conversation. No conversation about business or strategy is complete without talking about artificial intelligence. And you talked about long-term thinking, but artificial intelligence is changing by the day. So how should leaders be thinking about AI when they're incorporating into their strategy?
Yeah, for sure. And it can change everything. What I would say, and the last company I ran was very heavily driven by artificial intelligence and building machine learning models. It was bought by Booz Allen in 2022. So a very high-end tech company. So I know a bit about this. But when you look at the overall strategic process, which involves a bunch of analysis, perhaps some data collection, although I warn people, data is known. And therefore, if you rely on basing your strategy on known data, you're chaining yourself to the past. Whereas strategy, you need to lean forward into the unknown future. There's no data about the future. It hasn't happened yet. So you got to be careful about that. But you do need to do analysis. You do need to do hard thinking. And you do need to look for patterns in your operating environment, and how they interconnect with each other. And AI can really help with that. All that crunching, all that thought processing. And I think AI is particularly good at intelligently speeding up cycles of thinking or business or processes that just require time. But half of life is analytical and the other half is judgmental, as a mentor of mine once said. You have to be able to do the analytical to have the right to do the judgmental. And AI, I think judgmental is where humans are going to keep their edge over AI because it involves an intelligent bet about where prices are going, where consumer behavior is going, what competition might do when you actually don't know it, but you can maybe sense their options. And I think that is going to be a judgmental exercise that human beings will still be able to beat AI on. Whereas I think AI is terrifically good for a lot of the analytical work that needs to go into feeding the judgments.
The other, very interesting. And the other thing is talking about strategy is especially with big corporations. And when you look at like major corporations, they have this template, this strategic template, and to veer off from it. But if you look at, for example, some of the most innovative companies, Facebook, Google, Apple, they've sometimes veered off of this strategic framework. And how should a company be viewing off the beaten path of strategy when implementing these principles?
Yeah, I think you've got to be pretty flexible. I always tell my students in my strategy class, there's only one right answer ever in strategy, and the answer is it depends. And for students who are used to finance or operations management or accounting or engineering or something like that, right? They want the formula, and they want, if you do the right inputs, everybody gets the same answer. And my answer is it depends. So the strategist seeks for, on what does it depend? And so whether you are gritty and persistent and stick to your original strategy through thick and thin, which can be a great set of qualities, persevering, grittiness, or whether you flex to deal with changing circumstances and how often you flex, that just depends on the situation you're in. If you flex too much and respond to every little change in the market environment around you, you'll simply find yourself wasting energy and jumping from one lily pad to another. And you can't have any strategic continuity. On the other hand, if you stick to your plan, your strategy too hard, and the fundamental assumptions that underpinned it start to change and you carry on anyway, then you're just being bullheaded. I call the book The Strategy Dialogue because one of the points I'm making there is if you even have this conversation, like if John was for sticking with the plan and Chris was for amending the plan because things had changed, the fact that we would even be in a room having a conversation puts us in the 90th percentile of companies because we're having the right conversation about the right thing. And we've got our strategic minds, not our task accomplishment minds. How do I get this done by Friday? But we've got our strategic minds. What is the shape of the future and how should we amend our journey to be in the best position in that future? We're having that conversation.
And then a follow-up question. So, we'll dive into the book. And so your experiences as a professor, you got a assistant secretary of state and public company CEO. What are the key takeaways from your book, The Strategy Dialogues, and what is the impact you hope it'll have on readers?
Yeah. The real key takeaway is that strategy is a way to think, not a what to think. And what I do in the book is I outline the strategic thought process and how you use it. And I have the 10 most common kinds of strategic issues that a company might ever face in the book. And then how you go through thinking through those, and then with some examples, and then a chapter summaries, big reference guides, and all these frameworks, strategy issues. You've seen them, Christian, these diagrams. We love them. I can't order lunch without a 2x2 matrix. So we love those things. We call them frameworks. And they're not meant to give you a magic answer. They're meant to just help you organize your thinking. They're an analytical tool. So I have all that in the book. But the real takeaway of the book is someone says, we know every executive in life, big company, small company, has to be able to think strategically to progress in their career. It's a standard executive competency that is expected of leaders. And yet at the same time, there's almost no training for it. Probably 80% of corporate training is to get more certifications, more skills, as opposed to learning how to think strategically. So sometimes it's hard to get your hands around it. So what I try to do in the book is pull it out of the clouds, put it right into your hands. It's simple. It's organized. Here's the process. Here's how you know it when you see it. Here's a toolkit. This is the tool you pull out. M&A, pull out these tools. Think this way. You'll be able to approach a merger and acquisition opportunity more intelligently than you might have otherwise. So that's the basic aim of the book. It's what the British would call a primer or a primer. It's a basic guide to strategic thinking and strategic management.
Interesting. And how does the book stand out from other strategic management books? And can you share one of the most valuable strategic thinking frameworks and explain its practical application?
Sure. I'm happy to say the book stands out right now because at least for the past couple of months, it's been the number one in several Amazon categories. So it's standing out that way. And as an author, I'm very pleased about this. Why does a book like this shoot up to the top of the strategy charts, the business consulting chart, and things like that? Because it was needed, because there's so much out there, big, thick books. The stuff we subject our students to, these textbooks, is really awful and they're expensive. I think in a fast moving world, and you've alluded to this, in a fast moving world, I think people want something that's it's more than a pocket card, but it's less than a 1-year investment in a huge set of concepts. They want a basic guide to how to think, not what to think. and really ready applications so I can use it now. I can use it now. It can make me better at my job tomorrow. So I think the sheer practicality of it, Marshall Goldsmith said it was practical and entertaining. I think that's appealing to people, and it's because it's needed. It's needed. The world's changing so fast right now. You can't possibly keep up with everything that comes out.
Yeah, every time I'm like, for example, last like 2 years ago, AI was just 1% of the conversation, and then last year was more like 30%, and then this year it's almost every discussion involves AI, regardless of what industry. In your view, what separates the best strategists from the rest, and how can individuals cultivate these skills?
Oh, it's the way they think. In Las Vegas, they have this expression, a tell. How can you tell when somebody's bluffing? So what's the tell for a strategic mindset? They think long-term, not short-term. The best strategic leaders talk you into something by showing you how it connects to other things on a future journey. They don't say, Chris, the reason we need this report at the end of the month is because it's required by our regulator. That's not the reason they give. They say, look, if you can get that done by the end of the month, Chris, then we'll have this data and we'll be able to see the end of the quarter. If we can see the end of the quarter, we can shape the year's end. If we can shape the year's end, we're going to be in a totally different place in 3 years. So that's like a strategic action logic. They're big picture, not small issues, the best strategic thinkers. And they don't break problems down like an analyst. They pull stuff back together. The best strategic minds, the best strategic leaders look at the way ecosystems connect with each other and influence things. And I would say one other quality, the best strategic leaders are realistically optimistic. If you say, hey, boss, I've got a real problem, they say, let's reimagine your problem as a set of different possible paths to a new future. And we won't say no to something. What we'll ask is, what would have to be true for that path to happen? So you open up the aperture of your mind. You orient it towards possible futures. So it's a little bit more creative. And so those are the strategic tells of a mind of a leader who's really thinking big picture, future oriented, long term, and realistically optimistic about how do I be creative and drag people to a better future.
Interesting. How can people connect with you and check out the book and learn from you and reach out to you?
Yeah, so my website's johnhillen.com. I imagine you can throw that in the show notes, JOHNHILLEN. And then, of course, the book's available everywhere. The audio version is out now everywhere but Audible. They take a little longer to finalize their versions, but it's out on Spotify and Barnes & Noble, Google Play, and Apple Audio, all that stuff. And yeah, I hope you can check out the book and some of the arguments around it and some of the things on the website.
Excellent. I really enjoyed this conversation. And for all the listeners and viewers, be sure to check out the books in the show notes. And thanks so much for coming on.